So I think a great place to start would be where the Food for Mood campaign actually started. Why don't you tell us a bit about that?
Well, it's a very interesting story, Rupi. It, in fact, started with last year's conference when, if you remember, Uma was a great speaker, and remember Dean Ornish
Yeah.
and one or two other American guests. And the Prince of Wales was keen to meet them to find out what the conclusions had been. And halfway through the conversation, he said, wouldn't it be great if there was some agreement as to what people should eat healthily, and if it was fairly simple, and if people could get it easily. And Uma took up the challenge. And now a year later, here we are with the Food for Mood campaign, which I hope meets his expectations of something very simple that people can actually use.
Fantastic. So this, you hear about a lot of ideas starting around a kitchen table, but this was the Prince's kitchen table, I'm imagining.
It was rather a special kitchen table. Actually, it was a dining room table.
A dining room table, okay, fine, yeah. Uma, tell us about why you took up this challenge and how you're tackling it.
Rupi, I think it comes from the fact that I listen like a psychiatrist. That's my training. So in the room when we had this wonderful conversation, what I heard was a real desire to help the everyday person eat healthier. And I think it's really hard to translate down information into really simple language so all of us can understand. And at the same time, mental health is burgeoning. We know that from statistics from the World Health Organization. We know that from suicide rates in teens in the United States. And we know that from the mental health rates in the UK. So how do we put those ideas together? It seemed if you can eat better for your mental well-being, your physical well-being will follow. So that was really the evolution of the Food for Mood campaign, because we think it will target people's physical well-being, but also help them understand that there's this connection between food and mood.
Yeah, and for those of us who perhaps haven't listened to some of our previous podcasts or the stuff that we've done on nutritional psychiatry in the past, what are the key things that people need to understand to really get a grasp of food for mood? How do we eat for our mental well-being?
So it starts off with the gut-brain connection, which is one of the ways that we understand the food-mood connection. People don't understand that our brain and our gut actually originate in the exact same cells in the human embryo. They remain connected throughout life by the vagus nerve, which is the 10th cranial nerve, which allows for text messaging between these organs of chemical messages. And then when you realize that 90 to 95% of serotonin, the happiness hormone, is in the gut, made in the gut, and the receptors are there, which, by the way, is why if someone takes Prozac or fluoxetine or other selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, they often have gastrointestinal side effects.
Right.
It's really that reason. When you help people understand that connection, you start to unfold the food-mood connection. So food that you eat, as it's being digested, is going to interact with the gut microbes and going to have positive effects or not so positive effects. And once people grasp that, they realize that food is more than, what you eat for your waistline, the number on the scale, or, just a family history of type 2 diabetes. They start to put it truly together with their actual mental well-being.
Yeah. And so it's the gut-brain axis, it's understanding where these neurotransmitters are created and how this impacts our overall being. In terms of the foods that we should be concentrating our diets around, what are they? And then perhaps, Michael, we can talk about how we're translating that into everyday choices in the supermarkets or when we're out and about.
I'm going to start off with an example of the foods to be aware of, to avoid, because often people know unhealthy foods, but they don't make the connection to mood.
Okay.
And one of those things, which we know that refined sugars are not great for us, but, something that I taught at the conference last year was 4 grams of sugars, 1 teaspoon. And so in the US and here, we just try to help people understand the number of teaspoons or grams of sugars they're eating, even if they have a yogurt, which is a half a cup, but it could have 8 teaspoons of sugar.
Yeah.
So a plain yogurt with berries is very different. So just understanding the things to be aware of. Another example, Rupi, is someone trying to give up a sweet soda or a cool drink, goes to a diet version, but the artificial sweeteners disrupt the gut. So it may not help them. But the foods you can actually start to include on your plate, yes, those colorful vegetables, I should say, colorful berries and fruit and vegetables, everything that makes it, because the polyphenols interact with the gut microbes and those actually benefit your mood and your mental well-being. Fermented foods, huge study done, published in 2021 in Cell, which looked at fermented foods lowering inflammation, because inflammation is now being seen as the underlying factor that causes or worsens depression, anxiety, cognitive disorders, and more. So any way we can lower inflammation is good for our mental well-being. Then it's, the probiotic-rich foods, it's spices. I mean, I know you cook with a lot of spices. We love that. So turmeric with a pinch of black pepper, oregano, saffron, all actually have good data in mood. So just starting to include or expand your repertoire of what you're cooking starts. Those are just a few food groups to get started. But another one people overlook are leafy greens or green salads, because these are rich in folate or vitamin B9, and low folate is associated with low mood. So the more times you're eating green salads in a healthy way with a squeeze of lemon or some salt and pepper, is a way that you're taking in vitamin B9, which is helping your brain.
Yeah. Michael, I have this saying that I always talk to people whenever I'm explaining the science of nutrition. It's the science is complex, the solutions are simple, implementation is super hard. So the science around the microbiota is fascinating, it's complex, it's vast, it's confusing. The solutions, as we've just heard, very simple. Eat some more berries, have some herbs and spices, clean up your diet in terms of having too much refined sugars, be aware of industrial processing, implementation. That's the hard stuff on an everyday basis. So talk us through, you're a practicing GP, how do you tackle this problem today, and how could we be tackling it with the campaign that
I think there are two levels of implementation. One is making ourselves as clinicians and patients aware that this is really important. It ought to come first line before reaching for the antidepressant. I don't know if you saw that Panorama program last week, but it said the placebo effect of an antidepressant was 40%. This is the biggest trial ever done. And the active effect was 55%. So you're only helping 1 or 2 people for every 10 you give an antidepressant. So it's almost a no-brainer that you should try other things first. And as we heard this morning from Uma, that 70% of people with depression get better simply from having dark chocolate. Well, add in everything else you've just been talking about, and, why not try that first? Especially as it's not damaging you, it's only helping you. And for me, the light bulb moment was that 4 grams equaling a teaspoon of sugar. I mean, I've lost 1.25 stone since I last saw you last year.
You look very well.
Well, I've been reading the side of packets, and I've been absolutely amazed. How much sugar is in ordinary yogurts, ordinary stuff. So I stopped eating any of that stuff. I eat very well, and I'm lost 1.25 stone in weight. So there's a bit of seeing is believing as well. And I hope that my clinical colleagues will try these things themselves, and then they'll put them into action with their patients. But I think the main thing is a change in attitude, realizing that we really have to take this seriously, and this should be first line. Pill second, diet first.
What I'm hearing is, it really comes down to clinicians themselves embracing these ideas and putting them into practice. I guess the secondary point is, now I know what to eat. I've got those sort of health reflexes of looking at the packet as soon as I pick up anything, whether I'm in a store or a grocery aisle or wherever I find myself around the world. How do we translate that to patients so we can actually see those effects at a population level?
Well, I think, we in social prescribing we talk about patient activation index, which is the degree to which you're in charge of your own destiny. And I think that is the crucial factor. If things are so bad in your life you don't care whether you live till tomorrow or not, this is going to be irrelevant. And so this is where social prescribing comes in a way, because often it helps those with the worst inequalities to get their debts, their food, their jobs, their housing, etc. You've got to be in that sort of place before you can even start on this. And then it's a question of creating the motivation, activation, and also it becomes a roller coaster. What I'm finding in surgery, Rupi, is an increasing number of people who are beginning to grab it, especially middle-aged men, especially when their HbA1cs are almost diabetic. And I say, well, you're on the brink. And say, no, I've got to change my life. And they do. They do. So I think the message is getting out there with individuals. I think in terms of communities, we really do need to try very hard to change the local culture of norms. The only place where we've ever seen a real change is Sanjoki in Finland with childhood obesity, which was halved over 3 years. And that was because everyone was working together. The local authority, health, the nurseries, the retailers, everyone was working together. That's what we must do. And of course, with those Eat Well communities of the food strategy, we could do that because we'd be giving free fruit and vegetables to those who couldn't afford it. We'd be changing the culture in the schools. We'd be giving people, making sure people could have allotments, etc. But it's got to be a whole community change, and it'd be lovely to do that and to showcase a community that had actually hacked it, like that place in Finland.
Talk us through that example in Finland, because I'm not too sure if everyone listening to this would have understood what happened there. And
well, it's slightly controversial because unfortunately the improvements didn't accelerate as they were meant to, and some people have questioned the statistics. But there's no doubt that they at least stabilised and slightly reduced childhood obesity, and that was because everyone was aligned with the purpose. Finland starts off in a slightly better place because they've got much better community connection, and that's what we're trying to recreate with social prescription, etc. But what they did was they connected all the people involved with food together and got the parents motivated, as well as the schools, as well as the nurseries, and even planning, cycle lanes, pedestrian lanes, allotments, these sorts of things. I mean, we could do, I think, so much better in the UK if we really tried it. And my real sadness is it was in the food strategy, it was in the white paper. We've heard nothing about it ever since. It was only 7 million for this project over 3 years. It's so sad to see government dragging its feet over something which I think could be so important in terms of paving the way to what we can do. A bit like David Unwin in his surgery, where he's shown you can stop 80% of diabetics about to become diabetic from being so. I think we could show the same in a community, but we just need that support from government and NHS England
if you
to do
think
so.
about those statistics, like 80% of transition into
It's unbelievable, isn't it?
It is phenomenal.
Yeah.
Those are phenomenal numbers.
I mean, overall, it was, I think, a third of his diabetic patients, but of those that had only had diabetes in that year, it was 80%.
Wow.
Yeah. And actually, I think that's the cusp when I find that, as I said before, it's when the HbA1c has gone 43, 45, 46, 47, suddenly the light bulb strikes. And I say, okay, well, we can give you lots of tablets and they have all these side effects, or would you actually like to change your life? And they say, all right, doc, I'll change my life.
Uma, talk us through. Sorry.
I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say.
I was going to say something about diabetes because we had learned an interesting fact this morning that 14 billion being spent on diabetes care in the UK. And I had found out that 14.9 billion is being spent on mental health care.
Oh, wow.
So if you think about that, it's 14.9, so it's almost 15 billion, a billion more. If you think about that, maybe that could be a motivating piece to help our clinicians, because I do feel, Rupi, one of those intervention points is what what clinicians, health coaches, nutritionists, everyone in this integrative field is doing, because if we convey the message, then our patients learn the message. I think implementation is always hard, but I start off with the individuals who come to me because they want to make a change. They have it in their head that it's either the hemoglobin A1C or that their numbers are not looking good and their doctor's, trying to get them to do something different and they're petrified to take a medication, or they don't want to start a mental health medication. So what can they do? And they're actually a group that will buy in to the concept. So that's one thing. But I also feel the other lever is, what do our clinicians speak about in the visits? If you happen to be, and I don't necessarily think this should be the first line, but if you're going to prescribe an SSRI, why aren't you talking about diet? Are you offering that individual other things they can be doing? It really shouldn't be, and I speak from the US because it's very prescription based, and I don't agree with it.
Yeah.
I think it's necessary to save lives of people who are truly sick, but there are other integrative health measures that we can be using.
Yeah, it's almost like we need to generate our own prescription reflexes where we question whether the script is
Necessary.
the best first line
That's right.
treatment. And in many cases, it is the option that is required. And maybe there's a collaborative approach with lifestyle and food.
Along with lifestyle and food.
Exactly.
That can be done. So no one is saying if you need a medicine, you shouldn't take it. Just what can you do?
I mean, I think alongside of it's very serious, but I think our question, if it's mild to moderate, say, depression, and we know that often that lasts a month or two and actually gets better anyway, and we know that, for instance, if you take up a hobby, you're 3 times more likely to come out of that depression, let alone eating a black chocolate and the rest of it. Well, if it's a 40% placebo response, if you add the positive response of what I've just said, maybe that comes up to pretty near your 55 or 60% are giving the antidepressant. So, and given the Panorama program's emphasis on how difficult it is for some people to get off these drugs, then I think, for me it's a no-brainer that they should only come for the very serious cases where really all else has failed. Almost.
Where it's going to be life-saving. So active suicidal ideation, active symptoms where that can't, food can always be part of it, but it can be alongside.
Yeah.
But I completely agree, Michael. There's so many people, especially, this is what COVID taught us, that the number of visits that was shown and the wait for someone to even see a therapist.
Yeah.
These are, if this is a program that can reach the public, these are things someone can literally scan on their phone in the supermarket. And be looking at, as we develop out the program, look at what are the symptoms I'm feeling. These are the foods to try. And click through to see this is why, this is the mechanism, and then here's the recipe. So, it's sort of a chain reaction.
Yeah.
We want to take people on that journey and make it as simple as possible. So not using medical terms, just saying why you should eat a green salad. These are the nutrients, and here's a recipe. So that's how we're building the program, and it's meant to be something a person can implement easily.
So talk us through the campaign in a summary. So what are the key things that you're aiming for to be results of the campaign, and how does that relate to the program that you've just been mentioning?
Well, I think what we want is the public to be more aware. We want professionals to be more aware. But I think, as Uma's just said, almost at the point of contact with a supermarket for people to be aware. Because you talk about reading labels. Well, I think people won't have to read that many labels because they'll be eating stuff that doesn't have labels to start with.
That's it.
But when they do, hopefully, our app will allow them to think, well, actually, I won't buy the carrots today because I'm bit worried, everyone's getting flu, colds in the family. I'll buy the dark greens, and I'll buy the berries, etc., etc. So as you go around the supermarket, you can actually tailor make your shopping basket to the current state of your health, and it's much more than just treating illness. It's about preventing illness in the first place. The general mood of the country would be so much better if we ate better, and therefore we wouldn't have to start reaching for the antidepressants.
Yeah,
I think a lot of people know what healthy foods are. People know what's unhealthy. They know we shouldn't be eating ice cream and cake every day, but they don't often know why they should do it. And I think that nutritional psychiatry and this Food for Mood series, based on just healthy eating principles, is meant to fill that gap. Like, why should you eat the broccoli? Well, there are a couple of things that would make your kids really smart if they ate them. People care about those things. They care to feed their families well and offer them budget-friendly ideas. So some recipes would have tinned sardines or tinned salmon because these still are rich in omega-3s. And they're cost effective, but they also will have vegetables. And to Michael's point, they're not worrying about a label because it's actually just whole foods they're eating. But to encourage more of that and why, I think makes that connection. And hopefully just a simple way to cook it is a way that makes it more easy to do. We want to make it easy, for people.
I 100% agree. And I think sometimes the pushback I get when I explain this to perhaps other colleagues that won't be at an event such as the Personalized Medicine Conference, or, avid listeners to many other podcasts like my own, will say, well, the facts are 80% of what you see in supermarkets are ultra-processed foods. Most people don't have the skill set to use fresh foods that are often cheaper. They wouldn't have the culinary creativity to utilize those. Plus, we have a backdrop of a cost of living crisis where the unhealthy foods are being heavily marketed as cheap and affordable for them. And putting my sort of, capitalist hat on, I guess, supermarkets are not really incentivized to push the cheaper whole fruits and vegetables compared to the other products that have much higher margins. And so we're fighting quite an uphill battle, I guess, when you frame it like that. How are you sort of navigating those sort of difficult truths of the environment?
So I think that's a great point, and I'd love to hear what Michael thinks of this as well. But the way that I think about it, living in the United States, is that I choose my battles. Am I going to take on, big pharma and their prescriptions? Am I going to take on the food industry and how they, have marketing that suggests that the least healthy foods are actually healthy for people? And trust me, they're not trying to be tricky. They actually are doing it within food guidelines that exist. So what do I have as a clinician, as bringing my research and my training forward that can help? What I do have is the ability to educate people. And a lot of my programming now is on educating clinicians of different kinds. You don't just have to be a doctor. So we've started a program at Mass General to train clinicians using nutrition and mental health. We also have one that will focus on nutrition because that's a gap. And then educating the consumer. So the Food for Mood campaign is about putting it in their hand to know more, because they can make a difference. They can decide where to spend that pound. Should it be on 8 yogurts that are laden with sugar, or can they buy plain yogurt and chicken and cook it, or a frozen version, but stay as much as we can away from the frozen dinners and the frozen meals, because we know those are not healthy. I think that they have the voting power with their money, and by education is one way. It's not the only way, but it's one hope that I think you can change. And I think that while we do that, we also see what we can do in Parliament. I support that. I do that in the US. But that is a slower route. Yeah. And reaching the consumer and the clinician first is one way to change that conversation.
I agree. You can work with the system or you can change the system. Within the system, I think there's a lot you can do in education, particularly in schools with children. And you ought to interview James Fleming, a GP in Burnley, who has is introducing children at a very early stage to growing fruit and vegetables, how to cook them, and of course they're taking them home and changing things there.
Amazing.
And one of the College of Medicine's in our manifesto was that everyone should have access to somewhere where they can garden. That should almost be a civil right to a bit of an allotment. And in that way, I think you move the gradient a bit. But fundamentally, yes, we have a national conspiracy to make sure that the poorest get the worst food. And that's something we've got to change. And you can either change it, as I described, by having a community approach, like the Eat Well community, or you can actually get, I think, the food producers, the farmers, and the retailers in the same room. I mean, there's a lovely, do you remember the chief executive of Sainsbury's saying a few years ago, he was glad there was a limitation on sugar levels, because that meant all of the supermarkets had to have a level playing field. He actually liked the superimposition of that rule. And all this stuff we've heard in the press this week about nanny state, it's complete rubbish. I mean, you can't nanny people too much, but at the moment they don't have free will anyway, because they're part of this system conspiracy. And I've tried to bring all these parties into a room and realised how totally locked the system is. And the only way you can change it actually is by changing almost the currency. And we'll hear that from Patrick Holden on Saturday at the food conference. And that means taking into account all those hidden costs, the social cost of high chemical farming, destroying hedges, people not being employed on the land, etc., all the way through to pollution, the rivers, etc., 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 and climate change. Now, if we take all those costs into account, I think we would change our farming practices and would also change the food that we're selling in the shops.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think having transparency over the true cost to society of unhealthy food being promoted to the most vulnerable and the less well off, I think that needs to be accounted. But it's very, very hard, isn't it, for government to be aware of that. They don't really, take the example of polluted rivers, for example, as a result of manufacturers who are, based a few miles away. They've got the permissions to do so, but it's impacting our rivers, which impacts the chemicals in our water supply, impacts wild swimming, impacts local animals. So, there's no joined up thinking. And I see the same parallels within the food industry as well. And so it would be great to have transparency across that. Is that something that is on the cards for the Food for Mood campaign?
That's exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to create a momentum and a snowball effect amongst people and clinicians to make this happen. Because as you say, it's not going to happen on its own. I think we're going to clear sewage from rivers by 2050, is it? Long after I'm dead.
Yeah.
For heaven's sakes, let's have some ambition at last. Let's start thinking seriously. If you wanted to spot pollution in the rivers tomorrow, you almost could. It might take 2 or 3 years to get the sewage systems going. But, we're not trying hard enough, and that's what's heartbreaking. People are dying through bad food. They're dying through depression. They're dying through diabetes. And we're just not tackling it.
Yeah.
And there we are, as GPs being handed out bits for filling in boxes and making diagnoses. No one's paying me yet to cure them of diabetes or to change their life through diet if they're depressed or anxious. We've got to change the whole funding system, and we've got to have a will to do so. And we believe in this campaign. The point of this campaign is to mobilise the public and the clinicians, and then finally the press, and very finally the politicians, to do something.
Yeah. I'm very much a glass half full kind of person. But the skeptics might say, okay, if the government's got some very blunt tools. There's taxation, so we can put taxes on the processed foods that we know are harmful to our budget through indirect costs such as healthcare and on society and happiness levels that we should be actually using as a marker beyond, just GDP and the wealth of the country. So that's a very blunt tool that is actually somewhat of a regressive tax. And then also if you introduce guidelines like we did decades ago with fat, you reduce the fat, the industry will say, that's fine with us, we'll just load it full of sugar. And if we reduce sugar, we'll load it full of artificial sweeteners. And so we're sort of kicking the proverbial can down the road when it comes to actually getting to what we really want, which is more whole foods in the supply chain, and essentially providing tax breaks and cost savings on those to the general consumer. So with those tools in mind, paint a picture for me in 5 to 10 years of what you really want to see happen when a patient walks into a supermarket or into a clinic. How are we treating these people so we can get a real vision of exactly what we're after, and painting that vision to MPs and the government will be a lot easier that way.
Do you want to jump in first,
Michael? If you come to my surgery in 10 years' time, and we've already got 4 gardens, we've got a herb garden.
Your surgery is perfection already.
Well, we're about to do some community gardens so people can actually learn how to garden. So they can learn. But the change will be you won't be able to get through the front door for all the fruit and vegetables and messages on them. And then you go into our canteen, which isn't producing desperately healthy food at the moment, but it will be. It'll be like your doctor's kitchen. And we'll do the things we did before COVID, have diabetic evenings, have stress cooking evenings, whatever. And the doctors will all be enthused with it. So that will be the clinical thing. In society generally, good food will be cheaper. And not only will you have to have the college app, but actually it'll be marked on it. It'll say on those carrots, this contains
beta carotene.
Beta carotene, which will help you with sight, improve your immunity, and ditto when you go to the blueberries. It'll help you with your immunity, possibly help you if you get cystitis or cough, affecting the phlegm, and ditto when you go off to the broccoli and the rest of it. So we'll be that aware. It'll be in our DNA. At the moment, it's peripheral. It needs to become mainstream.
Yeah.
I'd love to share an example of someone in my extended family. So we have, large extended family, and some of the younger parents had a baby. And they decided that with both little boys who were about a year apart, that they were not going to eat processed foods. And they were not going to, even if they went to a birthday party, they were going to find a way to navigate that. And when I was caught up with them in my visit in England, guess what their trigger foods are? Berries. They love strawberries. They love any berry. When they had a snack, and I kid you not, I looked in absolute amazement. Their snack was hummus. They love hummus, so their mom makes hummus, so she buys it, and she has little packs with little carrots that they eat. And what it taught me was, okay, that's N of 1. But what it taught me is it starts with how we think about food. How do these parents decided that was how, at least till the age of 5 or 7, when they could make a choice at a birthday party, wherever it is. No one has actually restricted them from eating anything. And someone in the family had brought over a box of chocolates. They weren't eating the chocolates. They were at the table eating the berries. And I think it's there are many ways in addition to what Michael shared. I think it's how do we treat food? How do we think about food? My ideal navigation of using this system would be going to the supermarket and realizing the number of healthy foods you can eat. For example, cold season. Yes, you should eat your oranges, but actually there's higher vitamin C in kiwi fruit and red bell peppers. So just red peppers, having those in your salads, in your stir fries, in your anything that you're eating, can get your, can be a boost to help everyone's immunity in the family. Little things like that could be changing the way we think.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it can happen overnight or that it's perfect. And we're launching this understanding that it's something we want to develop, and we want people's feedback, and we want it to grow. But we figured we have to start somewhere with this. And so I see a way for people to literally navigate, not everyone, but like these parents who want their kids to eat healthier, just be able to navigate the supermarket differently, or the farmers, wherever they get their foods.
Yeah.
And we are very sensitive to making sure that there are not only budget-friendly options available, given the food crisis, that people can spend on bags of beans and healthy foods or tinned foods that are healthy. A tinned carrot is different from tinned salmon, right? Because a tinned carrot doesn't have the nutrients anymore, but tinned salmon has the omega-3s that someone can eat. So the more information people have in a digestible, easy way, that they can make the choices. Right there where they're paying for the food.
Yeah.
And I think that's powerful.
Yeah, at the point of purchase, they're making those informed decisions. I think that's really powerful. And, I think the campaign is fantastic. More joining up of the dots is required. I think a lot more clinicians, as evident by the fact that there are so many people at these conferences that we're putting up across the year is wonderful to see. If I had a wish list of things that I think should be sort of introduced, if I was sort of, nutritional medicine czar for the day, the things that I would, the things that I would request would be culinary medicine to be a compulsory module on all medical curricula. So right now, UCL is the only one that has it as compulsory. And the second thing I would try and work on is affiliating all GP surgeries with a cooking school, so a community cooking school. There are many GP surgeries that do that, but they're in the minority rather than the majority. And the reason why is because you can have those cooking classes for stress, for type 2 diabetes, for menopause, whatever health complaint, where you can teach them about the impact of nutrition, but also build a community within communities as well. And I think that's really, really powerful. And it doesn't necessarily need to be like a state-of-the-art cooking school that's literally bolted onto every GP surgery, although that would be wonderful. But an affiliation where we can actually point people toward registered nutritionists or dietitians, health coaches to promote those journeys as well as actually having a funnel, because a lot of GPs come to me like, I don't have time within my 8-minute consultation to talk to them about nutritional psychiatry. This gives them a prescribable way
to do it
of being
that
able
involves
to enable
food.
it.
I love that.
Yeah,
I think that's great, and
possible.
especially for mothers with young children. You know, you could aim it to, because you start with them young, as it were.
Yeah.
Get the whole, and I think you can get that community effect you described. You know, which James Maskell talked about earlier this morning, which is you know, you're not doing it on your own. You're doing it with other people, and you're getting feedback, and of course, actually quite an economic way of maintaining health through groups rather than our individual consultations.
Yeah.
So maybe let's get these Eat Well communities going, and let's get a kitchen in every GP surgery, and a kitchen in every school, and everyone able to grow their own if they want to, and then I think we can drag everyone else from the supermarkets downwards, dragging and screaming into our own plot.
Well, Michael, you've got the ear of some very influential people, so I think there's definitely a chance this could happen in the next few years. And yeah, you're right, the Eat Well communities, and you know, we're going to hear from Jonathan Pauling and Dr. Chi-Chi on Saturday about their prescribing fruit and vegetables and the free vouchers that stimulate the local economy, the local markets, and actually have had some profound effects on the people who are recipients of these vouchers purely by increasing fruit and vegetable consumption and doing nothing else. Even if you don't have to take away the unhealthy foods, just adding more vegetables to their diets has been wonderful. So look, you guys have got the power, you've got the ear of influential people. I think this is going to be fantastic, and I can't wait to see what happens in the next few years.
Well, thank you, Rupert. Thank you for everything you do, because you know this needs to be a combined effort.
That's right. We appreciate your support, and to your last point, I appreciate what you said, because this is an inclusive program. You know, I come from a mentality in the US of eat this, not that, which exhausts me, fighting it every day in the press. So it's really about how can you add more, because the more of those healthy foods you add, the unhealthy ones just kind of dwindle, and we actually notice in people that they no longer have some of those cravings as they're eating the healthier food. So that's a subtle effect that you hope for.
But what people need is the authority of someone like yourself, a Harvard nutritional psychiatrist, who can say this and that. The trouble is, at the moment in the UK, you open your tabloid newspaper and some rather attractive-looking girl is saying this week everyone should be eating apples or licorice or whatever comes into her brain or his brain, and I think, you know, and unfortunately that sells newspapers. But you know, the trouble is people end up confused. They don't know.
People do end up confused, and I think that's an excellent point, Michael. But also TikTok, you know, and social media. Now, many of us, like Rupi and myself, use it as an educational tool, and I was asked by media to provide a comment on how people they had this 0-calorie water craze on TikTok.
0-calorie water?
0-calorie water phase. So it's just consume your water. Sorry, 0 sugar.
Oh, 0 sugar. Yeah.
My mistake, 0 sugar, like 0 So I was very curious to know what it was. And it turned out that they were encouraging a healthy habit, drinking water, keeping hydrated. But what were they filling it with? Things like Skittles powder. So Skittles is a candy in the United States, and it's made into a powder, and they were putting it into the massive 40-ounce, but it's almost a liter, actually more than a liter, of water, encouraging hydration. But I'm like, but you're putting you're just putting pure sugar in the water. Yeah. So, but this craze was taking off, and that's why the reporter contacted me. So it's exactly, these influences are, you know, trends that happen. You see them all the time. But how do we still provide just knowledge to people? Sensible information. Less attractive, maybe. You know, less hype, less dramatic. But just the sensible information that people.
So. We're going to make it sexy. Thank you so much, guys. This is great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rupi. If you like that video, then you will love the full library from the Doctor's Kitchen podcast. We talk about inflammation, immune health benefits, and much, much more about food as medicine, including this video right here that you can click through right now.